My mother stumbled backward into the doorframe of my kitchen, her hand flying up to grip the wood like her niece had just decided they were done cooperating. The color drained from her face so fast it looked like someone had pulled a stopper. She had just heard, not from me, not gently, not in private, exactly what I had done. What I had been doing quietly for 8 months. What was now officially on record with the hospital, the insurance carrier, and the office of a family law attorney named Denise Okafor. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how we got here. Subscribe so you don't miss how this ends. Now, back to the beginning, because none of what happened in that kitchen makes sense without everything that came before it. The afternoon light was flat and gray through my kitchen window. My daughter Rosie's drawings were still taped to the refrigerator, the ones she made during her last allergy flare, when her throat swelled enough that I drove her to urgent care at 2 in the morning and sat in a plastic chair holding her hand while she asked me why breathing felt scratchy. 7 years old, and she already knew how to describe anaphylactic precursors better than most adults. She had learned because she had to. My phone was on the counter. The call with the patient rights coordinator had ended 4 minutes ago. My notes were open beside it, date, time, the name of every staff member I had spoken to, the reference number for the unauthorized cancellation incident report. I had not cried. I had not raised my voice. I had done what I always do when someone in my family does something that should be criminal. I documented it. To understand what happened that morning, you need to know what came before it. My name is Fiona Adeyemi. I am 38 years old. I work as a medical billing compliance specialist for a regional hospital network, which means, in practical terms, that I understand exactly what patient authorization forms are, exactly what HIPAA means in a clinical context, and exactly what happens when someone without documented legal authority attempts to direct care decisions for a covered patient. I know the words. I know the forms. I know the process. My mother, Constance Adeyemi, is 63. She is my biological mother. She raised me alone after my father left when I was 4, and for most of my life, I believed that history gave her a kind of permanent moral authority over my decisions. She sacrificed. She endured. She was owed something. That was the operating logic of my entire childhood, and it did not stop operating just because I became an adult. My daughter Rosie Rosamund Fiona Osei is my biological child from my marriage to my husband, Kwame Osei. Rosie is 7. She belongs, legally and biologically, to Kwame and to me. My mother has no parental rights, no medical power of attorney, and no HIPAA authorization on file at any facility where Rosie receives care. I want to be clear about that before I tell you anything else. The dynamic between my mother and me had a very specific shape. She was present, involved, and generous in ways that were also always quietly, consistently conditional. When Rosie was born, my mother appeared at the hospital with a list. Pediatricians she had already researched. Feeding schedules. A printed article about the risks of certain vaccinations that she had found on a website I recognized immediately as unreliable. I was 31 years old, lying in a hospital bed 12 hours post-delivery, and my mother was presenting me with a curated medical alternative curriculum. I did not argue. I thanked her for coming. I filed the papers in the recycling bin of my hospital room the moment she left to get coffee. That was the template. She would offer. I would receive. I would act according to what I actually knew to be true, and I would do it without announcing that I had done so. It kept the peace. It kept her close to Rosie, which mattered to me. And for about 5 years, the cost of that arrangement felt manageable. Then Rosie's allergist, Dr. Priya Subramaniam, identified a pattern in Rosie's reactions that pointed toward a specific immunotherapy protocol. It wasn't experimental. It wasn't fringe. It was a covered procedure under our insurance plan, flagged as medically necessary in Rosie's file, and it required us to join a waiting list. We joined that list in January. The wait was estimated at 6 to 8 months. I mentioned it to my mother in passing. I should not have done that. The first incident happened in March, about 6 weeks after I told her about the waiting list. My mother called me while I was at my desk at work. I remember because I stepped into the hallway to take it, and she told me she had been doing research. She had spoken to, and I am quoting her directly here, a woman from my church whose granddaughter had the same thing, and they treated it with a special elimination diet, and she is completely fine now. She wanted me to ask Dr. Subramaniam about discontinuing the treatment path and trying the diet instead. Her voice had that particular quality it got when she had already decided, not asking, informing. I told her I would mention it at our next appointment. I did not mention it at our next appointment. What I did do, that same afternoon, was call our insurance coordinator and confirm in writing that the immunotherapy protocol remained authorized and active on our plan. I wanted a paper trail that showed I had never wavered. The second incident was in May. My mother had somehow, and I still do not know exactly how, found the name of the pediatric hospital where Rosie's procedure was scheduled. She mentioned it at a Sunday dinner, casually, the way she mentioned everything that she had researched without being asked. She said the facility had mixed reviews online, and that she had seen something about a lawsuit from a few years ago that made her uncomfortable. She looked at Kwame when she said it, not at me. She did that sometimes, made her case to him, as if he were the more persuadable audience. Kwame set his fork down, very slowly, and looked at his plate. He had learned, over 9 years of marriage, that this was a conversation that belonged to me. I looked at my mother across the table. I smiled. I had already spoken with the patient rights office of that facility twice. I had already reviewed their accreditation records and their state inspection history through the public health portal. The lawsuit she had found was a billing dispute, resolved in the hospital's favor, 6 years prior. I knew all of this. She did not know that I knew it. I'll keep that in mind, I said. I filed that moment away. I had 11 of them now. The third incident was in July, and it was the one that shifted something permanent in me. Rosie had a flare, a real one, not a mild reaction, but the kind that meant an EpiPen and a 40-minute drive to the ER at 6 in the evening. She was fine. We got there in time. She sat in the exam room eating crackers from a hospital snack basket and telling the attending physician, very seriously, about her favorite cartoon. She was fine. My mother arrived at the hospital 40 minutes after we did. I had not called her. Kwame had not called her. She had called his phone repeatedly, gotten no answer, and called his mother, who called his sister, who told her which hospital we were likely to have gone to based on our address. She walked into the ER waiting room, and the first thing she said to me was not "Are you okay?" Not "How is Rosie?" But this is exactly what I was afraid of. This procedure is not going to fix anything. You are chasing a solution that is making her sicker. Rosie was not sicker. Rosie was eating crackers and describing cartoon characters. The flare had been triggered by an unlabeled ingredient in a snack at a birthday party, completely unrelated to any treatment protocol, as Dr. Subramaniam confirmed in writing the following week. I did not respond to my mother in that waiting room. What I did 2 days later was call the office of Denise Okafor, a family law attorney whose name I had been given by a colleague 6 months prior, and I made an appointment. I did not tell my mother. I did not tell anyone. The appointment with Denise lasted 1 hour and 20 minutes. We discussed parental medical authority, the legal definition of unauthorized interference with a minor's healthcare, and what documentation I would need if the situation escalated. She was direct and precise, and she used the same kind of language I used at work: forms, authorization chains, institutional standing. I left her office with a folder and a very clear understanding of where I stood legally. 2 weeks after that appointment, we got the call from the pediatric hospital. A slot had opened. Rosie's procedure was scheduled for a Thursday morning in August, 8 weeks out. I confirmed the appointment. I updated the authorization file with the hospital. I double-checked that the only names on Rosie's care authorization list were mine, Kwame's, and Dr. Subramaniam's. My mother's name was not on that list. It had never been on that list. I told her we were still waiting to hear about the procedure. I said it the same way I had said everything else, calmly, without detail, without giving her anything she could use. I didn't know yet that she had already decided she wasn't going to wait. The folder Denise had given me was sitting in the locked drawer of my home office filing cabinet, underneath the hanging file labeled Insurance, Rosie, which nobody in my family would ever voluntarily open. It had been there for 6 weeks. Inside it, a 2-page summary of parental medical authority under state law, a draft cease and desist letter with my mother's name in the header, and a single-page document that Denise had described, in her precise and unhurried way, as the cleanest possible instrument for this specific situation. I had not signed it yet. The timing had to be right. I kept it private for one reason that I could actually defend in a room full of people. I was not ready to use it, and an unused weapon shown too early is just a threat. My mother responded to threats by escalating. I had watched her do it my entire life. If she knew what I was building, she would move faster than I was prepared for, and Rosie was still on that waiting list with 7 months already behind us. I needed the procedure confirmed and completed before my mother had any legal reason to make noise. So I waited. I went to work. I reviewed authorization chains and insurance appeals and billing compliance reports. I picked Rosie up from school on Tuesdays and Thursdays and listened to her explain, at considerable length, the internal politics of her second-grade friend group. I called Denise once every 2 weeks. I did not tell Kwame everything, not because I didn't trust him, but because Kwame's face was an honest face, and I could not ask him to sit across a dinner table from my mother and hold a secret his eyes would eventually give away. The first close call came on a Saturday in late June at my mother's apartment. She had made jollof rice and invited us for lunch, which was the version of my mother I found hardest to navigate, the warm one, the generous one, the one who had actually sacrificed and actually loved and actually meant well, underneath all of it. Rosie was at the kitchen table drawing on the back of a grocery receipt while the adults ate. Kwame was telling a story about something that had happened at his firm. My mother was laughing in the real way, not the pointed way. Then she turned to me and said, with genuine curiosity rather than strategy, "I was talking to Auntie Comfort last week. She said her daughter-in-law just went back to work at St. Raphael's, in billing, same as you. She said the money there is quite good now. Better than before." I took a sip of water. She said they have a new department head. Are you still in the same team? More or less, I said. My mother tilted her head. You always say more or less. What does that mean, more or less? Kwame glanced at me from across the table, then back at his plate. It means the structure has shifted a little, I said. Nothing dramatic. What I did not say, that 4 months earlier, I had been formally designated as lead compliance reviewer on a contract review team, which came with a reclassification of my billing rate on the hospital's external consulting register. What that reclassification had done, practically speaking, was legitimize a set of income documentation I had been quietly accumulating for 18 months. Documentation that Denise had specifically asked me to compile as part of the legal preparation file. My income picture, on paper, looked very different from what my mother assumed it looked like. It looked like someone who had been building something. My mother set her fork down, very slowly, and looked at me with the particular expression she wore when she suspected I was being evasive, but couldn't locate the evasion. You work too hard, she said finally. You always have. I know, I said. I called Denise the following Monday and asked her to begin drafting the second document. I had come that close to losing everything I had built. The second close call happened 3 weeks later, at a birthday party for Kwame's nephew, a large, cheerful, slightly chaotic afternoon at a rented hall in the east end of the city, with too many folding tables and not enough parking. My mother had not been invited, which was not unusual. What was unusual was that Kwame's mother, Abina, a woman I genuinely liked and who had always treated me with consistent warmth, pulled me aside near the dessert table and asked me something I had not expected. Fiona. She kept her voice low, not conspiratorial, just private. I want to ask you something, and I hope you won't take it the wrong way. Of course, I said. Constance called me. She said my mother's name carefully, the way she always did, acknowledging the relationship without endorsing the behavior. She told me she is worried. She said she thinks the procedure for Rosie is, I don't know, unnecessary. She used the word aggressive. I kept my expression exactly where it was. Abina continued. She also said, and I am only telling you this because I think you should know, she said she has been looking into whether there is anything she can do. She didn't say what. Just that she was looking into it. The room was loud around us. Somewhere behind me, Rosie was shrieking with laughter at something one of the older children had done. I heard her without turning to look at her. Thank you for telling me, I said. Abina's hand moved briefly to my arm and then withdrew. She looked at me with the particular attention of a woman who had raised a son and knew what a controlled expression cost a person. Is there something I should know? She asked. Not yet, I said. But soon. She nodded once. She did not press. I found Kwame by the drinks table 20 minutes later and told him, quietly and without drama, exactly what his mother had just told me. I watched his face do the thing it did, the careful, deliberate stillness that meant he was angry and choosing not to be angry in public. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Tried again. What do you need me to do? He said finally. Nothing yet. Just know. I texted Denise from the car on the way home, while Rosie slept in the back seat with her head against the window. I told her what Abina had reported. Denise responded within 10 minutes. Accelerate the documentation. I want everything filed before the procedure date. Call me Monday. I had 6 weeks left on the timeline I had built with Denise. The procedure was scheduled for a Thursday in August. Everything was supposed to move in order, documents filed, procedure completed, then, if necessary, the cease and desist delivered. Clean. Sequential. Controlled. Then my mother made the decision that changed everything. It was a Wednesday. I know it was a Wednesday because I was at my desk reviewing a third-party billing audit when my phone lit up with a number I recognized as the pediatric hospital's main intake line. I answered it immediately, the way I always answered calls from medical facilities, already scanning for which patient or claim it might concern. The woman on the line was a scheduling coordinator named Brianna. She had a careful, professionally neutral voice, the voice of someone who had been trained to deliver unexpected information without inflection. She told me that there had been a cancellation request placed on Rosie's procedure. Placed that morning. The request had come from a woman who identified herself as Rosie's grandmother and stated that the family had decided not to proceed with the treatment. The audit report in front of me stopped making sense. I stared at the words on the screen without reading them. Was there a written authorization submitted for that cancellation? I asked. A brief pause. The request was made by phone. By phone, I repeated. Yes. Was the caller verified against the patient's authorization file? Another pause, longer this time. I'm going to need to check with our patient services team on that. Please do, I said. And while you do that, I need you to note that I am the legal parent and sole medical decision-maker on file for this patient, that no cancellation request from any other individual carries authorization, and that I am formally disputing this cancellation as of this phone call. Can you document that for me right now? Yes, Brianna said. Her voice had shifted. She understood now what kind of call this was. Thank you. I also need the direct line for your patient rights coordinator. I had the number written down before we hung up. I sat very still for approximately 30 seconds. The audit report was still on my screen. Outside my office window, the parking structure across the street looked the same as it always had. Nothing had changed visually. Everything had changed actually. My mother had called a pediatric hospital and attempted to cancel a medically necessary procedure for a 7-year-old child who was not her patient and whose care she had no legal authority to direct. She had done it by phone, without documentation, identifying herself as family and apparently assuming that would be sufficient. She had told the staff, I would learn the exact wording later, from the incident report, that the family did not believe in this type of treatment, that the child did not need it, and that the clinical team was overcomplicating things. Rosie, my daughter, who had gone to urgent care at 2 in the morning, who knew how to describe anaphylactic precursors, who had been on a waiting list for 7 months. I picked up my phone. I called the patient rights coordinator, whose name was Marguerite Bassett, and I said, I need to report an unauthorized cancellation of a patient's covered medical procedure. The individual who placed the cancellation request had no authorization on file, no medical power of attorney, and no legal standing to direct care decisions for this patient. I want a formal incident report opened. I want the cancellation reversed. And I want documentation of the original call, time, content, and the name provided by the caller. Marguerite Bassett did not hesitate. She had clearly handled this kind of call before, and she moved through the process with the efficiency of someone who understood that parental medical authority was not a gray area. By noon, the cancellation had been reversed. The procedure was back on the schedule for its original Thursday. The incident report was open and assigned a reference number that I copied into my notes with the date and the time. I sat with that for exactly as long as it took me to close the audit file, put my phone in my bag, and walk to the elevator. Then I called Denise Okafor. She canceled the procedure, I said, when Denise answered. A brief silence. Then, by phone. By phone. No authorization. She identified herself as grandmother. Did they reverse it? Already done. Incident report open. Denise's voice went to the precise, unhurried register she used when she was deciding something. Fiona. This is no longer a preparation conversation. She has now taken an action that constitutes unauthorized interference with a minor's medical care. That is documented, time-stamped, and on record with a credentialed medical facility. I know, I said. I need you to come in tomorrow. Bring your insurance authorization file, the specialist's medical necessity documentation, and anything you have in writing from prior incidents. We are not drafting anymore. We are filing. I was already at my car. The drive home was 40 minutes. Rosie would be at school until 3:15. I had the afternoon. I'll be there at 10, I said. I signed the first document in Denise's office the following morning, with the incident report reference number attached as an exhibit. The look on my mother's face when she eventually stood in my kitchen doorway, that was still 2 weeks away. But everything leading to it was now irreversible, moving in one direction, at a speed my mother had set herself when she picked up a phone and decided that her belief system outranked my daughter's medical record. She called twice that evening. I let it go to voicemail both times. Everything I needed to say, I would say once, in front of everyone. The mediation room at Denise's firm was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like recycled air and expensive carpet. It had a rectangular table, 8 chairs, a window that faced a parking structure, and a pitcher of water that nobody had touched. Denise had chosen it deliberately, not a living room, not a restaurant, not anyone's home turf. A room where the furniture itself communicated that this was a proceeding, not a conversation. I arrived 20 minutes early. I set my folder on the table in front of my chair, aligned the edges with the table's edge, and poured myself a glass of water. Kwame sat to my left. Abina, his mother, my mother-in-law, who had told me what she heard at the birthday party and had asked to be present, sat 2 chairs down, close enough to be with me, far enough to signal she was a witness, not a combatant. Denise sat at the head of the table in a charcoal blazer, her reading glasses on, her own documents already open. My mother arrived 8 minutes late with my cousin Adiz, who was 31 and had been my mother's closest confidant since my grandmother died 4 years ago. Adiz was not a bad person. She was a person who had spent 3 decades learning that agreeing with my mother was easier than the alternative, and she had never found a reason compelling enough to unlearn it. She walked in behind my mother and looked at the room, and her expression went very still in the way of someone who had expected something different and was rapidly recalibrating. My mother looked at the table. She looked at Denise. She looked at me. Then she pulled out her chair and sat down with the particular composure of a woman who had decided in the elevator that whatever this was, she was not going to be the one who looked rattled. "I don't understand why we need all of this," she said, gesturing briefly at the room, at Denise, at the folder in front of me. "This is a family matter." Denise looked at her with professional patience. "Mrs. Adeyemi, thank you for coming. My name is Denise Okafor. I am Fiona's family law attorney. We're here today to discuss a number of issues related to your granddaughter's medical care and Fiona's parental rights. I'd like to go through some documentation. Is that all right?" My mother pressed her lips together. Fine. That was the last moment of false normalcy. I opened my folder. I'd like to start with the incident report, I said. I slid a single page across the table. It was the formal incident report from the pediatric hospital, dated, stamped, and carrying the reference number I had copied into my notes the afternoon Marguerite Bassett opened it. It documented the unauthorized cancellation attempt, time of call, content of the request, the name my mother had given, the stated reason. It documented the reversal. It documented my formal dispute, time-stamped to the minute. My mother looked at it. A pause. 2 seconds too long. I was trying to help, she said. Her voice was level. She had prepared for this. I had expected that. You called a credentialed medical facility, I said, and attempted to cancel a procedure flagged as medically necessary by Rosie's pediatric specialist, Dr. Priya Subramaniam, without my authorization, without any documented legal authority, and without informing me. The facility has a complete record of that call. I am her grandmother. The word landed the way she intended it to as a credential. Denise spoke without looking up from her own documents. Under state law, Mrs. Adeyemi, a grandparent has no medical decision-making authority for a minor child unless that authority has been formally granted through a medical power of attorney or a court order. Neither document exists in this case. Adiz looked at her hands. I know what's best for that child, my mother said. Her voice had moved into the register she used when she was very certain and wanted you to feel the weight of that certainty. I have known her since the moment she was born. I have been present for everything. You have, I said. Which is documented. I slid the second page across the table. It was a timeline, 12 incidents, each dated, each described in 1 or 2 sentences, each sourced to a specific communication, a text message, a phone call I had noted in real time, the ER visit record from the night she appeared without being called, the dinner conversation about the facility's supposed lawsuit that I had fact-checked the following morning through the public health portal. 12 incidents across 2 years. The last entry was the cancellation. Every entry before it showed the pattern. The color started leaving her face. Kwame, to my left, set his pen down carefully and did not pick it up again. My mother stopped. Her hand moved toward the page and then stopped short, hovering. She looked at the dates. She looked at the specificity. She understood, in the way that a person understands something they have been trying not to understand, that these had been recorded as they happened. That I had not assembled this afterward in anger. That I had been watching and noting and dating and filing while she sat across from me at Sunday dinners and ate jollof rice and told me I worked too hard. You were documenting me, she said. The word documenting came out strangely, not quite angry, not quite wounded. Something between. I was protecting my daughter, I said. Someone had to be the adult. Her jaw was set. It was the line she had rehearsed. I could tell by the way it came out clean and declarative, no hesitation. You are running after a treatment that could harm her. I have read things. Her voice came out different on the last sentence, higher, tight. The procedure has been reviewed and approved by Dr. Subramaniam, by our insurance carrier, and by the hospital's pediatric immunology department, I said. It has been on the list of covered procedures under Rosie's health insurance policy for 2 years. Rosie had been on the waiting list for 7 months at the time you called. The medical necessity documentation runs to 11 pages. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I've seen studies, she started. I'd like to show you something else, I said. That was the first document. I had 4 more. I reached for the 3rd page. This one was on Denise's letterhead. It was dated 6 weeks earlier, the morning after the birthday party incident, after Abina had told me what she heard, after I had texted Denise from the car while Rosie slept against the window. It was a formal cease and desist, drafted and ready for delivery, citing the pattern of interference documented in the timeline, the unauthorized cancellation, and the specific provision of state law under which further interference with a minor's medical care could constitute a civil and potentially criminal offense. Denise had prepared it with the incident report attached as Exhibit A and the timeline as Exhibit B. It had been held in readiness for the right moment. This was the right moment. My mother's hand went flat on the table. Criminal, she said. The word came out as if she were testing its weight, deciding whether it could possibly apply to her. Unauthorized interference with a minor's medical care, Denise said, can be pursued as a civil matter or, depending on circumstances and jurisdiction, can involve law enforcement. Given the documented pattern and the specific action taken on, she checked the date, the 14th. We believe a formal cease and desist is the appropriate first step. It is also the last step before we escalate. Adiz looked up. She looked at my mother. She opened her mouth and then closed it. She had come here expecting a difficult family conversation. She had not come here expecting letterhead. My mother said, "I want to speak to Fiona alone." "No," I said. Her head came up. In 41 years, I had never said that word to her that cleanly, with that little attached to it. No apology before it. No explanation after it. Just no, dropped onto the table between us like a stone. She blinked 3 times fast, the way she did before she cried. She did not cry. She was not ready to cry yet. She was still trying to find the argument that would reorient the room, the one that would make this a misunderstanding, or an overreaction, or a daughter who had always been ungrateful for everything her mother had sacrificed. "I sacrificed for you," she said. Her voice had the quality of a sentence that had been waiting a long time to be used. "Everything I did for you. And now you sit here with a lawyer and you treat me like I am a criminal." "You called a hospital," I said. "You identified yourself as family. You told the staff that the family had decided not to proceed. You used the word we. There is no we in Rosie's medical decisions. There is only me and there is only Kwame." Kwame, who had not spoken, looked directly at my mother across the table. "That's correct," he said. It was 4 words. My mother looked at her son-in-law, who had always been pleasant and careful and never once contradicted her directly, and the composure she had been maintaining shifted. Not gone, but cracked. She looked back at me. "I love that child," she said. "I know you do," I said. "And I am telling you, with documentation and with a lawyer and with a cease and desist letter on the table, that loving her does not give you the authority to make her medical decisions. That authority belongs to me. I have protected it legally. I will continue to protect it legally. And if you interfere again, with her care, with her coverage, with any appointment, any specialist, any facility, Denise will file." Her breath changed. The room was very quiet. I reached for the next document. "There is one more thing I want you to understand," I said. "Not because it changes the legal situation. The legal situation is already settled. But because I think you have been operating under an assumption about where I stand, financially and professionally, and I would like to correct that assumption." I slid the 4th page across. It was a single sheet, a summary document from my financial advisor, Terrence Hollis, whom I had been working with for 4 years. It showed the current balance of the college savings account I had established for Rosie the year she was born, a 529 plan, now carrying a balance of $62,000, with automatic contributions that had never missed a month. Below that, one line, the current assessed value of the investment property Kwame and I had purchased 3 years earlier in the east end of the city, which we had renovated quietly and which was now assessed at $340,000 against a mortgage balance of $190,000. I had never mentioned either of these things to my mother. Not because I was hiding them, they were in documents, they were on record, they were facts. But because my mother had spent my entire adult life treating me as someone who needed guidance, and I had spent my entire adult life deciding which of her assumptions were worth correcting and which were simply the water I swam in. This one I was correcting now. She looked at the numbers. She looked for a long time. Her hand moved to the edge of the page and stopped short of touching it, the same gesture she had made at the timeline, the same reach that turned itself into a hover. "You never told me," she said. Her voice was different now. Something had gone out of it. "No," I said. "I didn't." "Why?" Her voice cracked on the single syllable. "Not all the way, but enough." Adiz, 2 chairs down from her, looked at the table. She put her hands in her lap. She had gone completely quiet in the way of someone who understood they were witnessing something they could not interrupt and could not fix and would have to carry afterward. "Because it wasn't relevant to your decisions about my family," I said. But I want you to understand it now, because I want you to understand that every choice you have made about who I am, every assumption about whether I was capable, whether I was stable, whether I needed to be managed, was made without this information. You made those choices about a version of me that you constructed, not the one that was sitting in front of you. Her breath changed again. She put her hand flat on the table a second time. If you're not subscribed yet, do it now, because what happens next is the part you came here for, she said. I was trying to protect her. It was almost a whisper. Her voice had lost the declarative quality entirely. What was left was something smaller and, in a different context, something I might have felt differently about. She was 63 years old. She had raised me alone. She had loved Rosie with a fierceness that was real, even when it was destructive. I could see all of that, and I could hold all of that, and it did not change a single thing on the table in front of us. I know, I said. That is what makes this harder, not easier. I looked at Denise. Denise turned to the last page in her stack. There is one remaining item, Denise said. She slid the final document to the center of the table where everyone could see it. This is a formal parental medical authority declaration, filed with the court 3 days ago. It documents Fiona as sole medical decision-maker for Rosamund Osei, with Kwame Osei as secondary. It specifies, by name and relationship, that no other individual holds medical authority for this child. It specifies the conditions under which that authority may be temporarily transferred. Your name, Mrs. Adeyemi, does not appear in this document in any authorizing capacity. It does appear once, in the incident report attached as an exhibit. My mother sat very still. The filing date, Denise continued, is on the cover page. You will see it was filed before today's meeting. This is not a response to anything said here. It was already done. My mother looked at the filing date. She looked at it for a long time. The date was 3 days ago, which meant I had filed it before I had called her to arrange this meeting, which meant I had not come here hoping to resolve something. I had come here to inform her that it was already resolved, and to give her the documentation while witnesses were present. She looked at the date, and then she looked at me, and then something in her face went very quiet, not the composed quiet of a woman choosing her words, but a different kind of quiet. The kind that happens when the version of a situation a person has been holding in their mind makes contact with the version that is actually true. She couldn't speak. I watched it happen, watched her sit back in her chair without appearing to decide to, watched her hand come off the table and find her own arm instead, a self-contained gesture I had never seen her make before. The certainty she had carried into this room, the certainty I had watched her carry into every room for 41 years, the certainty that she knew best, that she had earned the right to direct, that love was the same thing as authority, was simply gone. Not defeated. Not argued into submission. Just gone, because it had made contact with documentation and the documentation did not yield. Adiz looked at my mother and then looked at me. Her eyes were wet. She was not crying either, but it was close. She had the expression of someone who had spent years telling herself that my mother's behavior was love expressed imperfectly, and who was now, for the first time, sitting inside the full consequence of that belief and finding it heavier than she had imagined. Kwame, to my left, let out a breath slowly. He reached under the table and found my hand and held it once and then let go. That was all. My hands had stopped shaking, I realized, and then understood that they had been slightly unsteady since we walked in, a vibration below the surface I had not allowed myself to acknowledge until it was over. I let out a slow breath. My shoulders dropped half an inch. Denise collected the documents with her characteristic efficiency and aligned them against the edge of the table. The cease and desist has been served. The court filing is on record. Mrs. Adeyemi, I'd recommend you consult your own attorney if you have questions about the parameters of the order. Fiona and Kwame are available to discuss a path forward on family contact, but those conversations will need to go through my office. My mother stood up. She set her chair back under the table, carefully, the gesture of a person determined to leave nothing out of place. She picked up her bag. She looked at me one more time, and the look was not angry, which surprised me. It was something I did not have a clean word for. Something between grief and recognition, with nowhere to put either. She walked out. Adiz looked at me for a moment, then followed her. The door closed. Denise signed 3 documents in the following 20 minutes. Kwame and I countersigned too. The pitcher of water sat in the center of the table, still untouched, which struck me as somehow exactly right. We left the building at 11:48 in the morning and stood in the parking lot for a moment in the late summer air without saying anything. "Are you all right?" Kwame asked. "Yes," I said. And it was true, in the most concrete and uncomplicated sense, I was all right. The procedure was on the calendar. The filing was on record. Denise had everything she needed. Whatever came next would come through proper channels, and proper channels were something I understood exactly how to navigate. We picked Rosie up from school at 3:15. She came out of the building with her backpack on sideways and her hair escaping from one side of her braid, carrying a painting she had made in art class, something green and circular that she told us, with considerable authority, was a planet. She showed it to us in the car with the focused seriousness of a 7-year-old presenting important findings. We told her it was an excellent planet. She agreed. In the weeks that followed, my mother did not call. Not to argue, not to apologize, not to request. The silence was different from the silences I had known from her before. Those had always had a temperature, a pressure, a waiting quality. This one was just quiet. Through Adiz, who called me once about 3 weeks after the meeting and spoke carefully and said she was not asking me to do anything, just wanted me to know. I learned that my mother had moved from her apartment to a smaller unit in a complex closer to my aunt's family, about 40 minutes from where she had been living. The move had been partly financial. Her lease had been up, and the new place was less expensive by $620 a month. Adiz said she seemed tired. She said she had stopped going to the Wednesday church group she had attended for 9 years, because several of the women there knew me and she found it difficult. She said my mother spoke about Rosie sometimes, about missing her, and that she did not speak about the meeting. The procedure happened on a Thursday morning in September, 14 days after the mediation. Dr. Subramaniam's team was calm and efficient, and Rosie asked approximately 40 questions about the medical equipment, which the attending nurses answered with admirable patience. The procedure went well. We were home by 2 in the afternoon. Rosie was back at school by Monday with strict instructions on what to do if she felt a reaction coming, which she already knew, because she had always known, because she had been paying attention. Her follow-up appointments are fully covered under our health insurance policy. Dr. Subramaniam has already noted measurable improvement in Rosie's reactivity markers at the first 3-month review. She will have the specialist access she needs, funded, documented, and protected through the college savings account, through the insurance policy that has never wavered, through every institutional system I had quietly built around her while other people were busy telling me I was overcomplicating things. I don't hate my mother. That would require a kind of ongoing attention I no longer have the energy for. What I have instead is clarity about who makes decisions in my family, about where my authority begins and does not end, about the difference between love and control, and about the fact that those two things can exist in the same person simultaneously and still be addressed separately. Rosie asked me last month, with the direct practicality of a child who had noticed an absence, why Grandma Constance hadn't been over. I told her we were taking a break from visits for a while. She thought about it for a moment and then asked if we could have pancakes for dinner. I said yes. She went back to her homework. That was enough for me. So, did I go too far or not far enough? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe, there's more where this came from.